Update. Joining me today is Brenda Worthington. Brenda, thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Nancy, and thank you to all of you for participating today. As Nancy mentioned, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers, and there's also going to be my contact information on the very last slide. But first, we'd like to start out with this poll question. Nancy, I'll turn it over to you.
So our poll question is, are you familiar with the Functional Community Management Program? Please let us know, yes or no. Uh-oh, looks like the no's have it. We're running about 16, 17 no's, 85% on the no side. But that's okay. That's why we have Ms. Worthington here joining us today. So yes, Ms. Worthington, I think you're going to be very valuable in giving out our information.
Great, thank you. So as you can see on my first slide, the agenda, the very first portion of this presentation today will be sort of a FCM 101. So that'll be perfect for the folks that aren't quite familiar with this particular program. For the folks that are familiar with it, then the last couple of points that I'll make today are some of the very recent activities and the recent congressional requirement that's very, very new information. So you can see at the bottom of my slide, I've got what I call bumper sticker. The bottom line is this is about strategic human capital planning and the governance structure that we have in DoD to support it. And specifically, this is about the civilian security functional community, the civilian workforce. Wanted to start out with a little bit of policy, so you know that there's a policy basis for this program. It's the DoD Instruction 1400.25 and specifically the volume 250. So you can see the title, it's Civilian Strategic Human Capital Planning. The volume 250 is fairly new. We're happy to say updated in 2016. So for a DoD policy, that's pretty darn current. It provides those policies and procedures, guidelines about civilian personnel management. And specifically, the 2016 version highlights very specifically for how DoD components are to implement this program. I wanted to give you a direct quote from the policy there at the very end, which is the definition of strategic human capital planning. That sets up sort of our left and right limits for this program as well as for our webinar. So it's about assessing the current state of the workforce, identifying those skills and competency gaps and strengths, as well as forecasting our requirements for the workforce in the future. So the next slide will talk about who does this, who is part of this governance structure. We call them functional communities. That's the basis for everything that we do in this program. Functional communities, there are about 22, might be a few more. They're organized very much along discipline lines, if you will. So security is one, intelligence, financial management, and others, about 22. Within those functional communities, again, the basis for the work here, have been identified 33 mission-critical occupations. You see there the definition for a mission-critical occupation. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's critical to the execution of the DoD mission. And the 080 Career Field Occupational Series is one such mission-critical occupation. More about the who of this. These are the roles. So we have at the component level, component functional community managers. They are the single focus, the single functional community focus of security, legal, financial management, for examples. And that's my link to the components with this information flow and enterprise work that we do in this field. The next role are component integrators. Unfortunately, the acronym is CI, and in security and counterintelligence, we know that means something else. But for this community, they call CIs. The person that is at either Department of Army level or Department of Navy, they're cross-functional. They're looking out for their component across all the different functional communities. And the DoD organization at the OSD level that oversees this and drives the planning process is the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, and specifically the Defense Civilian Personnel Advisory Service. They host a lot of the things that we do at the enterprise level, help us with data, and you'll see some of the recent things that we've done through the OUSD PNR as we use it in the slang. So how do we do it? The governance structure that I mentioned is here. We have at this time 2 major groups within this governance structure. At the senior level, so SESs have a meeting called the Strategic Human Capital Management Executive Steering Committee. So long title, but it's the OFCMs and those component integrators at the SES level that meet every other month. And then at my level, action officer level, is the Workforce Planning Advisory Group. So you'll see at the end of the slide, we have wrapped in 3 previous action officer level groups into one now. We're working towards greater efficiency and greater collaboration, not having it all split out in the old way. I think this might be a good time to take one of our questions. No, that's pretty much FCM 101. I see one of our questions is, can you tell me who my component functional community manager is? So absolutely. If you'll please email me at the end of the presentation where my email address is, I can let you know who your component functional community manager is, or your component integrator, any of those points of contact. Great, thank you. Nancy, do we have any other questions at this time? I don't think
Not at this time, but I do invite everybody to go ahead, and if you do have questions for her, this is the time. Go ahead and type them in our Q&A pod. Thank you.
So some of our recent activities, now that we've talked about the structure and the policy and what has the structure been doing. So some of the highlights, you'll see the 2016 DoD Competency Assessment. So this is a congressional requirement that OUSD Personnel and Readiness hosted basically for all the functional communities. The requirement is to understand competency gaps and strengths, as mentioned previously, and this was done through a survey. So to prepare for that survey, you see that we had a series of enterprise subject matter expert panels that met to determine what do we want to survey, what do we want employees and their supervisors to tell us about the importance of different competencies now and the importance in what we expect the security professional will need to know in the future. So how competent do we see ourselves now, and what is important to know going forward? Those subject matter experts were from the security career field, and we had 2 panels, and we developed the survey questions. And what's important here is we developed those questions based on the DoD security skills standards. So we're very lucky in the functional community of security that we have a skills standards already developed. It's a living document. It is worked on at the enterprise level through the DoD Security Training Council, which is CDSE provides the executive secretariat functions for that. And that is what the DoD security, civilian security professional is expected to know. So other communities weren't quite as lucky. They didn't have a skills standards already established. So they struggled a little bit to find out, okay, what competencies do we want to survey? Like I said, this is a living document, and we're lucky that I believe we're on version 9. So we use those to develop the survey. It was put into a tool. It's called the DoD Competency Assessment Tool, or DCAT. That's an acronym that we throw around a lot in this particular program. And the survey ultimately it was answered by 562 OADOs and their supervisors in July and August of last year. It was a stratified random sample of security professionals that are in the HR system called DCPDS. They received an email. They were asked to participate in the survey. It was purely voluntary. It was explained to the folks that this was not a performance measure or performance management tool, but just to help forward, to keep our workforce moving forward regarding our competencies, and maybe lack of competency as well. The employee would get the survey, and then their employer would also, their supervisor would also answer a series of questions. That data we received from our elements in P&R. The dissemination of that data I have posted to my Mill Suite website, which you have a link for later in the presentation, and also we're working through the data analysis now. What I expect is that we will use some of that information to help us develop or refine potentially training at CDSE, certification education programs, and maybe also help the components with their own internal training programs to know where do we see our weaknesses. Do we need more work in information security, for example, or any of the other security disciplines. And please, if you have any questions, please let us know. Now I will see if we have a question. I'm going to hold on that for a minute. I'll keep on going for a couple more, and then we'll take that towards the end. It's related. Let's see if any of this will answer your question. So the next item is the DoD Office of Communication, no, the CIO, excuse me, Cyber Workforce Initiatives. Not a new program, but a new impetus. New Office of Personnel Management requirements for all the federal government to code government civilian positions based on their cyber-related work roles. So you may have heard of this in the past. They, I believe, started this in 2014. This is a new effort. It updates the work roles, it updates the information, and this is done with the HR professionals along with the technical experts. So hopefully the security functional community manager, for example, is working with HR to code these properly. It's a good program, fully support it, but what we need to be aware of and involved in is that our civilian positions that are 080s and 086s, if they are cyber related, need to be coded properly, but if they're not, we don't want them to be miscoded, because there are going to be training, education, and certification requirements for these coded positions, which again, if they're cyber related, that's great news. But if they're not, and there's anecdotal evidence that some positions are not coded properly, we just want to make sure that they are. So I provide this information to you for your situational awareness so that you can be on the lookout for this program, or maybe ask your component functional community manager about it. The other impact of this coding initiative is that they're also in the process at the personnel and readiness and CIO level of developing a cyber accepted service. Cyber accepted service is similar to the intelligence professional accepted service, and so there's a whole schematic on how that will impact that coded workforce. If you have more questions on that, please reach out to me. That's about an hour's worth of discussion that we could have there. The other item that we've done recently over the last 6 months is the update to the DoD Security Skills Standards, which I mentioned, which is our baseline document for our profession. And that is the enterprise development and addition of cyber-related skills to the skills standards. So we recognize, and all of us recognize, that we need to know as security professionals, based on today's threat, how to deal with, at least who to talk to when it comes to cyber-related events, or cyber-related preparation, mitigation, and reaction, if you will. So we had a series of subject matter expert panels hosted by CDSE and Certification Program Management Office to develop these skill standards. We're proud of them. I've included a link to the fact sheet that CDSE has published that lays out what's the impact to certifications. So just very quickly, there is a impact to the certified, the fundamental certification as well as the application certification. And this is basically knowledge and awareness. These are not turning somebody into a cyber warrior, but things that we already know that we should expect from ourselves when it comes to dealing with cyber issues. So I will take one of these questions. We were previously told that speed certification was going to be a requirement. Is this still something that we are looking at having implemented? So yes, that's a great question. And for civilians, depending on where you're located, that already is a requirement in some position descriptions. So the PD may actually say must attain Security Fundamentals Professional Certification, SFPC, within the first 2 years of your incumbency. So yes, that is a requirement. It's being implemented at different speeds, at different components within different HR systems, but that is a requirement going forward. And if that doesn't answer your question, please follow up. Next question is, within DoD, is there a deadline for all ADOs to attain their security professional certification? If so, what is the drop dead date? So implementation is done at your component level or your gaining component. So if you are looking at a job description for a new job, it may specify that in there. If it doesn't, then you'll see how it flows once you get on board in a new position. And again, I encourage you, if you need me to follow up a little bit more on that, please let me know. Punch in your question, and we will take that on. I mentioned at the top of the presentation that we've got some really new information about what our current congressional requirement was. I want to give you a real quick overview of what we have been doing for the last couple years. Based on Title 10 USC 115B. This, through the National Defense Authorization Act, required the Department of Defense to have a workforce plan delivered to Congress every other year. And folks in the audience that I can see helped work on this at the enterprise level. We called it the Strategic Workforce Plan, or the SWP. Within the SWP, we had an appendix that was just for security, and that laid out what we determined to be our goals for the security functional community going forward. We were required through the National Defense Authorization Act to do those skills and competencies assessment, therefore the competency assessment that I mentioned, identify those gaps, develop strategies to close the gaps, and then assess the total force mix, so military, civilian, and contractor. So that requirement, that particular portion of the NDAA no longer applies. And what we're headed to now, as I mentioned, is really new information. We are not required any longer to submit a strategic workforce plan, so no SWP, but you will see that the new OPM federal regulation, the Code of Federal Regulations, this rule requires all federal agencies to develop a human capital operating plan. That plan is directly supporting the DoD annual performance report. So I have a link on my MillSuite website that has where I posted the DoD annual performance report. A lot of folks aren't familiar with that. Federal agencies are required to have these performance reports, and they have performance measures that we report on periodically. So the SWP, like the SWP, it will address workforce skills, competency gaps, future requirements, but it's tied directly now to that performance report. Other than that, P&R, Personnel and Readiness, is working on what the format will be, the frequency, how we're going to do it. I'm sure we'll do it at an enterprise level like we did our strategic workforce plan. I'm sure that the functional communities will have a role, security and all the others, and so I expect more details to follow. The place to find these additional details, as I mentioned, is my MillSuite site, which is co-hosted by Personnel and Readiness. It's available to military, civilians, and contractors that have CACs. So if you're in direct support of the government, I've got I put my briefing slides and anything that I pick up, and I mentioned the agency plan on that site. And one of the key elements that I've posted, you see the CIO's brief on the Cyber Workforce Initiative. So that goes into more detail about the coding and especially about the cyber accepted workforce. Two other products that I wanted to highlight to you is the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence Human Capital Management Office has published a memo in that first bullet, which lays out where we're headed and what we've succeeded at in both intelligence and security certifications. And the security career field under the auspices of the CDSE can be quite proud of our certification program. And then the next bullet is the annual report, also by the Human Capital Management Office of USDI, that is rolls in intelligence and security training across the DoD. I have another question here. Is there consideration to developing a training team to provide the required knowledge for SPEED certification or is the intent to continue using various online courses? This person is interested in having a dedicated team versus an 080 making time in their schedule. So that is a good question. That is something that I will pass along to CDSE, Center for Development Security Excellence, because that might be a place where a team would come from if that was determined to be the future. I imagine this is something like a mobile training team, if I can make that equivalency, and maybe something that the components might be interested in doing as well. So I will definitely pass that on. Thank you for the question.
If there are any additional questions, folks, now's the time. Please let Brenda know. Brenda, we do appreciate you spending time with us today and bringing us some insight into what the functional community management is all about. Folks, if there is no more questions at this time, Brenda has shared with you her email address. Feel free at any point in time to reach out to her. She'll be happy to respond. Brenda, a quick thank you so much for joining us today. And before I let everybody go, looks like we have couple more questions, so let's see. Let's see what we got here. There's a question about educational links were not accessible. I'm not sure which educational links you're talking about, but again, if it pertains to the references that were in this webinar, please shoot an email to Ms. Worthington. Can we get copies from you? Yes. Actually, the handout located in the file share pod, located in the lower left-hand corner, just click on that file name, FCM Update Handout. Click on the button that says Download File. A new browser will open up and you can actually save the handout for today's presentation onto your desktop. And again, Brenda is available. Feel free to shoot her an email. We got a comment in here from Wayne Lund. Wayne, thank you for joining us today. It's nice to see your name pop in. And his comment is, thank you for sharing this valuable information. So thanks, Brenda. We appreciate that. Okay, folks, last call for questions. Last call for questions before I switch layouts. Don't run off. I would like to get your feedback today on today's presentation as well. So don't leave us yet. Give me a second here. Okay. Thanks, guys. We're going to close it up here. I'm going to change layouts. Again, if you can give us some feedback, some comments, tell us how we did. Once again, thank you for joining us today, and that concludes our session.
This will conclude the audio portion. Parties may disconnect their lines at this time. Thank you for attending.